Hello, everyone. I'm Olympia. Thank you for being here with me in this wonderful place called Lights Out Library. And I have a great story to tell you. We're going to spend the next hour or so in a world of sparkle and luxury. My story for tonight is an overview of gemstones, from their types to their cutting, their use, their mining, what they are made of, and their history too. I will tell you about various famous gems like diamonds, such as the Koh-i-Noor, which is part of England's crown jewels, or the Star of India, one of the world's largest sapphires. We will examine the most precious types of stones, such as diamonds, emeralds, sapphires, rubies, and semi-precious stones. There are many of them, including aquamarine, amethyst, lapis lazuli, and amber. I will go into more detail about some of them. This gives us a lot to discuss tonight, so it's going to be another long journey. But for now, all you need to do is prepare for it. So sit or lie down comfortably. You are free to close your eyes at any time if you feel like it. As always, you do not need to watch the video to follow along. If you wish to, you may close your eyes and only focus on the sound of my voice as we embark on this adventure together. If you are so kind, please subscribe to my channel and click the like button. This helps support the channel and limits ads as much as possible. Please follow us on Facebook for announcements. If you fall asleep and wish to resume the video later, or jump directly to a particular part of the story, timestamps are listed in the description below, and also in the first comment pinned. Also below, you will find links to different streaming options like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Amazon Music. But before we begin, take a long, deep, relaxing breath. When you exhale, release the tension in your shoulders. Release the tension in your facial muscles as well, and allow the sound of my voice to guide you through this journey. What is a gemstone? There are different types of materials that we call gems or precious stones. The majority of them, including the most expensive, are mineral crystals. We will later see what a crystal really is, but not all of them are crystals. Some others are rocks like lapis lazuli or opal, and a few others are not crystals nor rocks. They are organic materials like precious coral, pearls, or amber. There is a big variety of colors, materials, and even prices. Some precious stones or materials are relatively affordable, like amethyst, and others are tremendously expensive because of their purity, rarity, or size. The one type of precious stone that has become a symbol of wealth and perfection in the West is the diamond, and some extraordinary diamonds take even more value because they have a history that makes them unique in the world. So, before we go into more detail, we're going to begin with a story and follow one of the most famous diamonds throughout centuries of history, the Koh-i-Noor. The Koh-i-Noor is on display at the Tower of London and is one of the most precious pieces in the British crown jewels. However, it became British only in the 19th century when it was ceded to a young Queen Victoria. It already had centuries of history before arriving in England, and it was already famous. The origin of the diamond is unclear, but it was mined in India, possibly at a place called the Kolar Mine, a site in the south of India, in a region called Golconda. Maybe you have heard about this name, Golconda. It is associated with extraordinary diamonds, and until the end of the 19th century, it was the primary source of the finest and largest diamonds of the world. In the 16th and 17th centuries, there was a dynasty called the Qutub Shahi that dominated the southern tip of India. During this period, the Golconda diamonds that were under the dynasty's control were brought to Hyderabad to be evaluated, polished, and sold. Some of these diamonds ended up traveling to other corners of the world, apart from the Koh-i-Noor. They included the Hope Diamond, which is a blue diamond currently at the Smithsonian in the United States, and it acquired a reputation for being cursed. There is also the Dresden Green, a green diamond that also traveled from India into the hands of a Dutch merchant. It was then sold to the King of Poland and ended up in Saxony, Germany. Another one is the Regent. The Regent is a remnant of the French crown jewels and is currently on display at the Louvre Museum. It is said to be the purest in the world among large diamonds. The Koh-i-Noor was found sometime between the 12th and the 17th centuries. It is impossible to be more precise because records are lacking. What we know is that the diamond was in the possession of the rulers of the Mughal Empire in India in the 16th century. The Mughal Empire was a large state founded at the beginning of the 16th century that controlled much of modern India and Pakistan. And its founder acquired the diamond as a tribute during his conquests. Back then, the diamond would have been much bigger than today, weighing 187 carats. Today, it only weighs 108 carats. A carat is a measure of the weight of precious gemstones. 1 carat is equivalent to 0.2 grams, or 200 milligrams. This mass has changed a bit historically. The carat was progressively adopted in Europe from the 16th century, and its standard was fixed in 1907, more than a century ago, at 0.2 grams. Since then, it has become an international standard recognized everywhere. So the Koh-i-Noor fell into the hands of the Mughals, and it was used to adorn an extraordinary piece of furniture, the peacock throne, at the beginning of the 16th century. This was the golden age of the Mughal Empire, when it covered almost all of the Indian subcontinent and its emperors were maybe the wealthiest dynasty in the world at this time, at least when it came to their stock of precious metals and gems, on par with the Ottomans. There is no original known painting of the throne nor sketch. They were made later based on descriptions of it, but Mughal historians and European travelers left testimonies of what it looked like. They said the throne was made of solid gold, sprinkled over with rubies, emeralds, and diamonds, of course, and there would have been so many of them that they couldn't be counted by visitors. But the Mughals declined, and in 1793, their treasury was looted by the Persians. They gave the diamond its modern name. The Shah, the Emperor of Persia, would have called it Koh-i-Noor, which means mountain of light in Farsi. When he put his hands on the diamond, and the name stayed. But the Koh-i-Noor didn't stay long in Persian hands. The Persian Empire collapsed too in 1747, and the diamond passed to the rulers of Afghanistan before returning to India, where it became the possession of the founder of the Sikh Empire in 1813. It remained there for 36 years until it was ceded by treaty to the Queen of England, Queen Victoria. The diamond was, in fact, for tribute a spoil of war after the British defeated the Sikh Empire and annexed. It's so once again the Koh-i-Noor changed hands as a result of a conquest. At this point, its size was still almost twice as big as today, and the diamond was not entirely cut and polished. To give it more symmetry and eliminate imperfections, it was recut in 1852 in London, and its size dropped from 187 to 108 carats. Not everyone was happy with this huge reduction in size, but actually it probably increased its value. The size is one factor in the value of a gem, but only among others. Its purity is at least as important. Its cut, which determines its sparkle, matters too. Everything counts. By making it pure, because flaws were removed, and it was now more symmetrical, the new cut also changed the status of this diamond. And most experts actually agreed that the job was well done. The diamond was now a personal possession of Victoria, and she wore it mounted on a brooch and a circlet. But over the years, she became uneasy with wearing this diamond because of how it had been acquired. It was a spoil of war. In letters, she confessed she felt bad about how it had been obtained. There had been a treaty to legalize the acquisition, but a treaty imposed on the vanquished for a gemstone that had nothing to do with territorial or trade conflicts. So it was a form of legalized looting, in fact. So she disliked wearing the diamond more and more, not just for moral reasons, but for diplomatic reasons too. The British did not eliminate Maharajas and generally the political structures in India. They used them to control it, and Victoria became Empress of India. Displaying the war trophies was not a very smart move diplomatically when you needed to gain support from the Indian ruling class. That is why she disliked wearing it, however prestigious the diamond was, but not to the point of giving it back, though. After her death, it became one of the crown jewels. It was mounted on the crowns of several queens, the wives of Edward VII, George V, and finally the Queen Mother's crown in 1937. But what are diamonds like the Koh-i-Noor made of, and why are they so precious? Diamonds are not made of a rare material at all. They are made of carbon, which is abundant in the Earth's crust and its atmosphere. They are exceptional because of the arrangement of carbon atoms. They are arranged in a crystal structure called diamond cubic. So, what is that? We often hear about crystals, but the meaning of the word is sometimes unclear. In chemistry, a crystal is a solid material with a particular arrangement of its component atoms or molecules. Their arrangement is nearly perfect in the sense that this structure repeats itself over and over in the object. When this crystal forms, this crystal structure is continuous and unbroken at the scale of an entire solid. It is called monocrystal or single crystal. A monocrystal is what we call a crystal in everyday language. They have visual characteristics such as surfaces and angles that look geometric because there is so much recurrence of the microscopic structure. Like the entire solid, they also look organized. If we are less scientific and more poetic, it is true that crystals look wonderful. They are objects entirely created by nature, with a structure that directly speaks to our sense of aesthetics and almost to our minds because they are structured. They can be seen as an invitation to see a form of design in nature. Now, is it a pre-existing design, or is it the human mind establishing connections with existing natural structures because we also belong to nature? Or is it because nature dictates our mental structure? These are other questions that belong to metaphysics. But in any case, crystals are wonderful and they are not limited to geology. Various atoms or molecules can take their crystalline form at the surface of the earth. For example, water and snowflakes are crystals, as is sodium chloride, better known as table salt. When they are observed through a microscope, crystals have atoms in a near perfect regular arrangement. All materials have such a regular arrangement, but only on a small scale. Microscopically, they look like an agglomeration of tiny crystals, but the regular structure does not extend to a large scale, to a macro scale. In that case, they are called polycrystals, which is a very common form of arrangement. Most metals, rocks, ice, ceramics, and similar materials have a polycrystalline structure, meaning that you find tiny crystals inside, but they don't look like one. And then there are other materials with a completely chaotic, random internal arrangement. These are called amorphous. They include glass or plastics. Ironically, your fake jewels made of glass or transparent plastic couldn't be further from the real ones based on their internal arrangement. They may look the same at first sight, but their structure is completely different. In common language, there's also a precious kind of glass that is called crystal glass or lead crystal. It is used to make tableware or decorative objects generally, and it's a very pure material obtained through high precision techniques, replacing the calcium used in glass with lead. But in terms of chemistry, this is completely unrelated to crystals, and the internal structure of crystal glass is the opposite of a crystal. It is amorphous. The reason why diamonds are extraordinarily rare on Earth is because of the very specific conditions required for carbon to acquire this structure, and how unlikely it is that a formed diamond reaches the surface where it can be found. Most diamonds are formed in the Earth's mantle at a depth of 150 to 250 kilometers. This is way deeper than we could ever dig. The deepest holes are only 10 to 12 kilometers deep. This is barely scratching the surface compared with the depth where the conditions of temperature and pressure are extreme enough for carbon to adopt a cubic diamond structure. At this depth, the mantle is not convecting, it barely moves. So the probability that these regions very slowly move up towards the crust before reaching regions close to the surface is extremely small. Diamonds can remain deep under our feet for billions of years, and only a tiny fraction of them will ever be accessible, at least with the kind of technical means we can imagine. At this point, a common misconception is that diamonds are formed from compressed coal. This could theoretically happen because coal is a rather pure form of carbon, but it doesn't really occur in nature. Coal comes from buried prehistoric plants, and diamonds that are collected at the surface are far older than the first plants. Their carbon probably comes from rocks that contain carbon. Because of their formation history, diamonds tend to be found in the stable cores of continents, where geological layers are older, typically 2.5 billion years or more. These regions are far from the edges of tectonic plates. This is why the most known diamond-rich regions in the world were found historically in the south of Africa or Russia. But there are exceptions to this rule, like in Australia, for example. Because of the particular structure it adopts, a diamond possesses certain properties. It is very hard, in fact, the hardest of any natural material on Earth. However, hard does not mean strong. The hardness of a material refers to its resistance to abrasion or scratches. Diamonds are highly resistant to such wear and tear, which is why they find their applications in industrial settings too. They are capable of cutting materials like glass. Furthermore, it is lesser known that diamonds also possess the highest thermal conductivity, meaning they conduct heat better than metals. The structure of a diamond also gives it its high dispersion of light, causing it to reflect light in all directions and giving it its distinctive fire. Historically, diamonds were first discovered on coastlines or in rivers before landmines appeared. Diamonds began to be used as decorative items several thousand years BC. In modern times, diamonds have become the reigning kind of precious stone. However, this was not always the case. During the Middle Ages, for example, other stones were more sought after in Europe, with diamond being just one precious stone among many. Rubies and sapphires, in particular, were more popular back then. The extreme popularity of diamonds started only in the 20th century, when they became the go-to gemstone in engagement rings. The main factor behind the rise of diamonds was a company called De Beers from South Africa. De Beers still controls a large part of diamond mining and trade nowadays, and it was the first mining company to establish a large-scale mine in South Africa. They marketed diamonds starting in the 1930s, and they continue to do so today as the most perfect gemstone and one that should be used in engagement rings, creating a powerful symbolism around this crystal, especially in Western countries. They have turned diamonds into a symbol of eternity, perfection, and purity. And it is true that diamonds are rare and remarkable, but there is also a whole industry behind them. The rough diamond production in the world annually is about 26 tons. These 26 tons turn into less when they are cut and polished, but still, it is about 71 kilograms or 156 pounds per day. Since you started listening to this story, based on the yearly average, more than 3 pounds of rough diamonds have been mined around the world. That's more than 7,000 carats. The majority of these are very small crystals, but a majority has impurities. Only a portion will end up having gemstone quality, but still, the price is obviously related to the rarity, as well as the aesthetics and marketing of diamonds. Because other crystals that are lesser known and cheaper, like alexandrite, for example, are even less common. It's just that they're not as appealing. Theoretically, a perfectly pure diamond is completely colorless. It looks white. However, diamonds are almost never perfectly pure. Even when these impurities are almost undetectable, the common impurity is nitrogen. When there is enough of it, the tint becomes yellowish to brown. It doesn't mean the diamonds lose all value. It scores lower on purity. But if the color is homogeneous in the cut gemstone, it gives it a particular identity. More rarely, diamonds can have a pink or blue coloration, and because these tints are exceptional, The more intense the color, the more expensive they tend to be. The famous pink diamond, Koh-i-Noor, also known as a Sea of Light, was part of the Persian crown jewels. It weighs 182 carats. Much more could be said about diamonds, but since I was telling you that other gemstones, like sapphires and rubies, were more sought after by ancestors, let's move to different types of gems. Sapphires are known for their deep blue color, and rubies for their intense red. But these two gemstones are actually almost the same thing. And sapphires can come in other tints as well. Like diamonds, these crystals are made of aluminum oxide. They typically contain traces of iron and rare elements like titanium or chromium. This type of mineral is called corundum, and it forms in rock deep under the surface, but not as deep as diamonds. Corundum appears in so-called metamorphic rocks, like many precious and semi-precious mineral gemstones. Metamorphic means that these layers of rock have been transformed physically and chemically by high temperature and pressure. Metamorphism means literally a change in form. When these rocks contain aluminum and oxygen, sapphire and ruby may form. The reference color for sapphire is a vivid blue. The most sought after stones are the ones with a pure blue and a saturated color, which shouldn't be too pale. But pure blue sapphires are exceptional in nature. They often have a secondary tint that can be green or violet. Sometimes, due to their components, they can acquire a completely different color. Chromium may give pink sapphires. And if there is enough chromium, the color becomes more intense, ranging from reddish to vivid green, in which case it's called a ruby. Rubies are the name given to red sapphires, actually. All the other colors are called sapphires, and they can come in almost any color: yellow, orange, green, violet, purple. Sometimes they are colorless, in which case they are used as a substitute for a diamond in jewelry. Rubies are often formed with semi-precious stones called spinel because they form in similar situations. If there is magnesium too, it combines with aluminum oxide and gives spinels. Another more common mineral found with these two is peridot, which has an olive green color. The intensity depends on the quantity of iron. Interestingly, peridots could also arrive on Earth on meteorites. They form in other parts of the solar system too, with the same elements. They contain magnesium, iron, and oxygen. Sapphires of gem quality can be found on every continent except Europe. The highest quality deposits are found in Kashmir, India, and Myanmar, Burma, Sri Lanka, Madagascar. But there are mines in other African countries, as well as Colombia, China. Some can be found in the US, in Montana. Something that complicates a little bit the evaluation of sapphires for trade is that they are very often treated to improve them visually. The most common treatment is to heat them at high temperatures for several hours or even several days sometimes, because it makes their color more intense and it can eliminate a few inclusions. The treatment of sapphires is a very ancient practice. The Romans already did it, but it has taken massive proportions in the past few decades, and a majority of stones are now overheated to improve their aspect. This is legal, but it should be disclosed to the buyers theoretically. In practice, it is not always disclosed. Rubies were also known in antiquity from Asia to Europe, and they traveled along the Silk Road with other valuable items. Historically, the best deposits were, and still are, in Southeast Asia, in Myanmar and Thailand. The color red was the king of colors in medieval Europe. It is no longer the case today because blue tends to be the most popular color. But this cultural change was progressive and is fairly recent. 1,000 or 500 years ago, the majority of Europeans had red as their favorite color, and rubies were particularly sought after. Their chemistry was unknown, and they could be mistaken with spinels that reached the same prices. Spinels are still among the most expensive semi-precious stones nowadays, and they are very rare. Like sapphires, rubies can be heated, and this has affected their market value in the past few decades. They can be heated to make the color more intense and dissolve small inclusions of other materials. Another treatment is to fill in the fractures inside the ruby with lead glass to make the stone more transparent. This is done in high temperature ovens where other components are added. This cheating with sapphires and rubies doesn't make them lose their status as precious stones, but it has probably contributed to the rise of diamonds because heating a diamond doesn't change its quality. These treatments are detectable because they create very small bubbles and cavities and fractures inside the gems, but still, they affected the status of rubies and sapphires. One of the largest and most famous sapphires in the world is the Star of India. It is displayed in New York City at the American Museum of Natural History. It is a big stone of 560 carats, and it has a very particular star effect called asterism. There is a 6-branch white star appearing on it. It also has a milky grayish blue color. The particular color and star come from the presence of titanium in the stone. Titanium oxide in tiny fibers inside the mineral reflects light into the star pattern. It was also cut and polished very differently from the gems we talked about before. It has been shaped with a smooth surface. One side is rounded and the reverse is flat. This type of cut is called cabochons, as opposed to faceted. The most common approach to gemstone is cutting it to facet them. This enhances their aspect by making them shine and reflect light in every direction. This type of cutting in facets is ancient, but it really became the norm in the past few centuries. Prior to this, the default method of preparing gemstones was this cutting, cabochon. The stone was cut and polished to give it more symmetry and a perfectly smooth surface. This type of cutting is still in use as a preferred method for some semi precious stones like amber or opal. Amber is very different from all the other materials we talked about until now. It is originally organic, not mineral, because it is ancient tree resin that has fossilized. Amber is not extremely rare, but it doesn't appear easily. For amber to be created, a prehistoric tree had to lose resin that would form drops on the trunk or at the base of the tree. And then this resin had to resist decay. Most of the time, it would break down due to exposure to sunlight, rain, temperature, bacteria, or fungi. The resin had to be either resistant to this or be immediately protected from these forces, for example, because of a sudden ground collapse. And then, once buried under a thick layer of sediments, which takes millions of years, it may be exposed to pressures and temperatures that modify its organic structure. This process is called molecular polymerization. Amber remains an organic material that is now made of very large molecules, polymers, and its aspect is generally yellow to brown, almost black. The color is generally associated with the amber being light to dark orange. But even though this is really rare, amber can also be blue or green, and these varieties are highly sought after. Amber often has inclusions, plant debris, or insects, which are prehistoric remains that were trapped in the resin and fossilized with it. The most famous region for amber since antiquity is the Baltic Sea, and amber has been used in jewelry since then. The Amber Room is often considered one of the greatest works of amber art in the world. It was originally constructed in the 18th century in the Catherine Palace of Sasko-Selo near St. Petersburg, Russia. The room's walls were adorned with intricate panels made entirely of amber, gold leaf, mirrors, and semi-precious stones. The designs featured various themes, including mythological motifs, landscapes, and ornamental patterns. Initially gifted to the Russian Tsars by Frederick William I of Prussia in 1716, the Amber Room underwent several modifications and relocations over the years. Its opulent beauty and historical significance made it a remarkable symbol of wealth and power. Another semi-precious stone also prepared on cabochon is opal, which is the national gemstone of Australia, where it is fairly abundant. Opal, like amber, is amorphous. It is not a crystal, and it doesn't appear deep into the earth crust, but rather as an inclusion in many different types of rocks. It doesn't need high temperatures or pressure to form. Opals appears when silica, the main component of sand, combines with water. Precious opals are iridescent, and the most precious ones are black. Silicates make up about 90% of the Earth's crust, and they can combine to form many different precious stones. I'll take one example, lapis lazuli. Lapis lazuli is another metamorphic rock, meaning it forms in the crust at high temperatures and pressures, which modify the structure of the material. The compound that gives it its distinctive blue color is lacerite, a mineral that combines silicate with various other elements like sulfur or chloride. The intense blue comes from the presence of trisulfur, a combination of 3 atoms of sulfur in the crystal, which absorbs the blue segments of light intensely, making lapis lazuli appear intensely blue. There are important deposits in Afghanistan, along the Andes, especially in Chile. It is also mined in Russia. The main region of origin in antiquity was Afghanistan, and from there it was adopted in many different cultures. In Mesopotamia, in India several thousand years BC, in the Caucasus, and also in ancient Egypt, where lapis lazuli was a stone worthy of pharaohs. It was used extensively in the Mask of Tutankhamun and probably by many other Egyptian pharaohs. It was somewhat forgotten in Europe until the Middle Ages, but then it made a comeback, still coming from the mines in Afghanistan, and it became the most precious of pigments for painting. It was ground into a powder called ultramarine, and because of its price, it was used to paint the clothing of several figures by painters like Titian or Vermeer. It served especially to paint the clothing of the Virgin Mary in religious scenes. This is one of the elements that changed the status of the color blue, which came to replace red as the most popular color. But maybe among precious stones, the most crowded family is quartz. Quartz is a fairly abundant type of crystal. It is made of silicon and oxygen. There are many different varieties depending on small variations in composition that change their aspect, but they are all made of the same main components, and they appear as a result of a crystallization process inside the Earth's crust. So many precious stones are, in fact, different varieties of quartz. Pure quartz with nothing else is transparent and colorless. It is not that frequent, and a lot of quartz is called milky. There are fluid inclusions, which can be gas or liquid, that remained trapped during crystal formation. As a result, the crystal is white with a lot of irregularities inside. This is not precious at all. There is an abundance of such quartz, and it is of very little value, generally. But other colors exist with a pure aspect, and they include famous semi-precious gemstones. There is amethyst, which is bright violet to lavender. Amethyst appears as a result of the presence of iron in the area, Amethyst was actually extremely precious in antiquity. To the Greeks, it was one of the cardinal gemstones, on a par with diamonds or rubies. However, when huge deposits were discovered in Brazil after the exploration of the New World, the commercial value of amethyst dropped. Another example is citrine, which also appears because of iron impurities and is yellow. Amethysts and citrines are sometimes found together, and actually, many stones sold as citrine are amethysts that have been heated to alter the color. Not all quartz is transparent. They can also be translucent or completely opaque. These include aventurine, agate, onyx, jasper, or tiger's eye. All of these crystals are quartz with different types of impurities and crystallization processes, but they are primarily made of the same elements, silicon and oxygen. I was telling you that by tradition there are 4 gemstones called precious stones. This is a status they acquired over the centuries due to their rarity and beauty. We have already talked about diamonds and sapphires and rubies. One is missing, the green wonder, emerald. I will also tell you about aquamarines because, in terms of chemistry, they are almost the same thing. Emeralds are a type of beryl, and beryl is another mineral that crystallizes with the same quite common elements we have already seen before: silicate and aluminum, plus another rare element called beryllium. Beryllium is a base chemical element, and it is number 4 in the periodic table of elements. However, even though beryllium atoms are relatively simple, they are also rare in the universe and on Earth. An emerald is a beryl, colored green by a bit of chromium. A major source of emeralds in antiquity was Egypt, where they were mined since the 2nd millennium BC. There were other mines in Australia and India. The Romans knew and used a variety of gemstones, and emeralds were among the most important ones. Once they controlled Egypt in the 1st century BC, they exploded these mines, and on an industrial scale, the Byzantine Empire continued the mining operations until Egypt was conquered by the Arabs under Islamic rule. Egypt remained a major producer until the end of the Middle Ages. No mines remain today because Egyptian deposits were depleted, and Egypt and India were replaced by Colombia, where massive deposits were discovered by the Spanish. Colombia produces more than half of the world's emeralds nowadays, followed by Brazil, Zambia, Zimbabwe, and the US. The color is deep green. Some beryls are not green enough, and in that case, they don't qualify as emeralds. They are called green beryls. Emeralds tend to have a lot of inclusions and fissures. They are not as hard as other gemstones, and no emeralds ever found could look perfect when magnified. Typically, diamonds are graded with 10 times magnification, and on that scale, the visible flaws determine the quality. Emeralds are graded by eye. If the stone has no visible flaw without magnification, it is considered of the best quality. To enhance their surface where there are almost always fissures, emeralds are oiled with an oil like cedar oil that is absorbed. When the stone is heated, and it fills in the fissures, it gives the gem more clarity and regularity, and it makes the cracks disappear or be attenuated. The traditional cut for an emerald is rectangular, with facets around the top edge. A more frequent but still valuable form of beryl is called aquamarine. It has a pale blue color that comes from iron instead of chromium, and it is one of the most sought after semi-precious gems. Aquamarine can reach much bigger sizes than emeralds. The largest aquamarine of gem quality ever found comes from Brazil, where it was discovered in 1910 and cut. It weighed over 110 kilograms. That's almost 250 pounds. The largest known aquamarine is in the US. It was cut in an obelisk shape and it weighs 10,000 carats, 2 kilograms. The bigger Brazilian stone was full of imperfections, so it was broken into multiple smaller stones. There are more lesser used beryls, used in jewels such as morganite, which is pink, and heliodor, which ranges from pale yellow to gold. The countries in the world that have the richest deposits of gemstones of all kinds are Russia, Brazil, and Colombia. The most important country for emeralds is Myanmar. Myanmar has a vast array of precious and semi-precious deposits, but it's particularly known for rubies. There's India and South Africa for diamonds, of course. In many of these countries, you don't actually know whether these resources are a blessing or a curse. They do not always benefit the population. On the one hand, they bring jobs and can be exported, but they may also bring corruption, smuggling, and even fund wars sometimes. You probably heard of blood diamonds in Africa. In various countries, including Liberia, diamond mining funded a guerrilla for years and perpetrated a civil war. It also happened in other African countries or in Colombia since the 1950s, even though the situation has improved in this country. It is hard, if not impossible, to know how a precious stone bought on the other side of the world has been extracted, by whom, and who it benefits exactly. This happens because gemstones concentrate a very high value in a very small item, and this value is not just about their rarity. The rarity is a starting point, but apart from a few industrial applications, the majority of gemstones are not useful. They are not utilitarian. Therefore, jewelry, which generates a constant demand for more, and their high value is cultural. Their rarity and appearance make them desirable even though they are useless, or when their decorative qualities can easily be replicated with cheaper materials. So the price they reach is, in a sense, absurd. In fact, many people do without them, either because they cannot or do not want to pay the price. But there is no sign that their appeal is decreasing. We keep dreaming about them, even giving them names to some of them when they are exceptional. In some families, a particular jewel or a particular gem is invested with symbolic value and is transmitted from one generation to the next. There is no end in sight to the importance of precious stones and their almost magical power. When it comes to them, we can all relate to a lesser degree, probably. Golem in The Lord of the Rings, like for the ring he becomes obsessed with. Gemstones have this ability to fascinate and obsess, despite their simplicity, or maybe because of it. We've come to the end of our little journey tonight. I hope you enjoyed this adventure, and I invite you to discover and learn more. Now you can let go and sleep, and until we meet again, good night. Sleep well.